Hello everyone and welcome back to Brain Muffin at the Movies with Channel Dad reading more articles. And here we have something from Screen Rant in the too long didn't read section of things. Star Wars fans will forgive the Rise of Skywalker quicker than the prequels. I found this very funny because I still think the prequels suck. I know a lot of people said, oh, they're not so bad. They're horrible. It's just Disney Star Wars is worse, okay? So Star Wars Rise of Skywalker is likely to enjoy a warmer reception than it currently holds in the coming years, especially in comparison with the similar path traveled by the prequels. The prequels are getting more love because the new ones are so bad. The release of the Rise of Skywalker this past holiday season would result in an exceptionally polarizing... The release of the Rise of Skywalker this past holiday season would result, in an exceptionally polarizing reception, one that would inversely mirror that of The Last Jedi 2 years earlier. No. The Last Jedi was a very polar... Actually, The Rise of Skywalker didn't receive a polarizing reception. The Last Jedi did. What the Rise of Skywalker did is it really irritated everybody. Those who loved Last Jedi hated it. Those who hated Last Jedi hated it. And there's only a handful of people that like it. So it really brought the fans together oddly. Of course, the Disney era is also hardly the first time the franchise has been less than universally beloved. Yeah, since the start. I think Rogue One, here's what my take on the whole Disney Star Wars, and it's already started. Rogue One is going to be seen as the best of the four, or the five, and it's going to be tolerable. It does dork around with the original trilogy's opening, but and it makes some of the dialogue make no sense whatsoever. And yes, we do have a female protagonist, but she's not a Mary Sue character, and that she actually sort of has a story arc. There are a lot of reshoots in there. I still want to see the original cut. I want to see the original Gareth Edwards cut still. In fact, The Rise of Skywalker makes a significant comparison point with the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy in the late 1990s and early 2000s. That trilogy would go through its own bumpy road of being the butt of jokes about the depth to which Star Wars had seemingly fallen, even as all three consistently filled movie theaters without breaking a sweat. Here's the thing that people forget, okay? They all made a lot of money. There weren't a whole lot of people who hated them when they were out. That was years later. The Force Awakens was instantly hated by some. The Last Jedi was instantly hated by half the audience. And maybe a third liked it. And no one, well, very few liked The Rise of Skywalker. Solo bombed, and Rogue One was the seemingly best of the bunch, even though it was really just 2 sentences in the opening crawl of A New Hope, or what we used to just call Star Wars back in my day. While there's a lot of comparison and compare and contrast between the prequel trilogy and the Disney Star Wars films, it's hard to deny that reception of The Rise of Skywalker wasn't exactly been commensurate with the exceptions placed on the glorious conclusion. With the expectations. We had a glorious conclusion in 1983, okay? To a nonology spanning back to the late 1970s. However, there's a lot in the history of Star Wars as a franchise suggests that the movie's reputation has likely improved over time. In fact, one need only look at the prequels themselves, again with the prequels. And if this author goes through the myth that Empire was hated back in 1980, which it wasn't, that's another one that I've seen. Yeah, it didn't do as well. Star Wars fans have embraced the prequels. One notable phenomenon that Star Wars has seen in the reevaluation of the prequel trilogy, it certainly isn't the first time the movies that were once the subject of a negative or polarizing reception. They were not polarized. They were, oh my God. The Shining, John Carpenter's The Thing being notable examples. However, the built-in Star Wars fan base and a few other factors make the renewed love for the prequels a somewhat different. Okay. The Shining was not hated, and neither was The Thing. I don't think people understood The Thing for a while, but it was not hated. Many contemporary Star Wars fans were first introduced to the franchise as a whole through the prequels, and that early love would carry over as that generation grew up, while many of today's younger Star Wars fans would get their first experience with the franchise through Disney films, and that's true. The expansive nature of Star Wars canon would also provide a basis for the prequels to be reevaluated due to the popularity of the Clone Wars. I will say that people who have watched the Clone Wars say it does help with the prequels a lot. And I think, again, this is because George, he had a bunch of yes people. He didn't have really good creative people who would stand up to him and say, no, George, that's stupid. Let's do this, like he did in the original films. And you start to see this with Return of the Jedi a little bit because some of those people had already left. And I think that's why Return of the Jedi is the weakest of those. With its more direct tie to the prequels and the involvement of the prequel characters like the young Obi-Wan. Again, and we also know part of the problem with the prequels is we know where it goes, right? We know how the story ends, and that's annoying. However, the Star Wars ring theory also provides an explanation of the prequels' reevaluation with close examination showing themes and character points the original trilogy found to echo within each parallel film. And that, again, this gets to George Lucas's comment of it's like poetry. It rhymes. These characters, these factors combined have surely contributed to the improved reputation of the prequels, but it also bears repeating how much of the uphill battle has been for them to get to that point. Yeah, and I think that kind of started it, but it really, the new Disney films really have cemented people looking at the prequels completely differently. And I don't know if the people who did the People versus George Lucas have apologized for that abhorrent piece, but I do like the re-edit that was People Against J.J. Abrams for The Force Awakens. It made a heck of a lot more sense then, too, because if you go back and look at news reports, and I have, maybe 25% of the people didn't like the Phantom Menace, and most people liked it. Most people loved it. Star Wars was back. With all, granted, there are bits and pieces people really like the pod racing and other stuff, and then there's all this nonsense about the green screen stuff, which was somewhat true with the actors, but they used more miniatures in one movie in the prequels than they did the entire original trilogy. So they just scanned it into the computer and then shaded it there. The prequels are more hated than Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, over time, but that took years. Although now I think Rise of Skywalker had, because of The Last Jedi, so the enthusiasm for the Rise of Skywalker was so much lower that it just, it just didn't do it. Just didn't cut it. People didn't care anymore. Anyone who has paid attention to Star Wars since the dawn of the new millennium is aware of just how hated the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy was when it was released. It was, oh my God. The documentary The People versus George Lucas even went as far as to devote a large section of its runtime in the prequels to the prequel trilogy's infamy. Yeah, and when did that come out? It should also be without saying that few, if any, characters in the cinema history have been subject to backlash. Now, that is true, and it's unfortunate for the actor. Jar Jar I thought was an absolute insane character, and I didn't like the Phantom Menace for many, many reasons, but one of the things it was too parallel to A New Hope, and that was kind of sad. The Rise of Skywalker is in different position than the prequels in that the hate it has received is balanced out by the equally vocal number of defenders that the prequels did not see at first. What? That is complete and utter baloney. The prequels were not instantly hated. That took years. Again, this is another article trying to redo history. While far from the Empire Strikes Back levels of acclaim, that's another example of Star Wars movies growing more beloved over time. That's not true. The comparison between the prequels and the Rise of Skywalker shows the former carried a far greater burden of disdain. There's everything in this article is wrong. Furthermore, that also highlights another key point about the reception of the Rise of Skywalker the prequels did not have to contend with. Is this still going on? Okay. Oh, I thought this was this is almost done. My goodness. To understand the hate towards both the prequels and the Rise of Skywalker, it's important to analyze that each represented to the Star Wars canon within their own time. When Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace hit theaters in 1999, audiences had the opportunity to walk into their local cinemas to travel to a galaxy far away for the first time in 16 years. Interviews with moviegoers came out in front of the theaters in advance. Okay, right, which we sort of had for the first one, but by the time we get the Last Jedi, we didn't have this anymore. And by the time Rise of Skywalker came, I was there opening night. Okay, opening night, packed theater, but not a packed movie house. The very first show, one of the very few, I don't know, I forget how many showings, but it was on a Thursday, and the lobby was empty. And there was barely a golf clap at the end of the movie. Okay? Full theater. Not a single open seat. and it was so dead. It was unbelievable. I have never seen a reception like that for a Star Wars movie, ever. For the beginning of the Star Wars prequels, but I did not see Last Jedi in theaters. I saw Force Awakens in theaters, but also major contrast with the Rise of Skywalker with a full audience. Now, I know I did see the Phantom Menace was only maybe 20 people in there, and okay. Following the release of the new Star Wars movie every year since 2015, so The Mandalorian, there's anticipation of the Rise of Skywalker based on it being the conclusion. No, that's how they build it, but we knew it was a disaster. And with that came the expectations that the fan theories typical of the closing chapter of a long, with the movie clearly went into a different direction for many. That anticipation also wasn't based in a 16-year-old drought. In a more advantageous, well, I would say it was slightly in a more advantageous. The Revenge of the Sith, though, it had a much better reception, and it actually went up, whereas this one went down. With the sequel trilogy now complete, all 3 films can be viewed in succession. Yeah, but you can skip the Last Jedi and not miss a beat. Improves with, okay. One other area where Star Wars also benefited, not shared by other franchises in its relationship with non-cinematic material. Okay, yeah, Star Wars, okay. Received at some point, this is the Too Long Didn't Read version. My goodness. However, these and other elements like Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter are now already set up to be completely canonized within Star Wars. Yeah, but it's stupid. Palpatine being a clone and other aspects omitted from the film. Yeah, but the other the other non-cinematic canon, if you will, it enriches the story. It doesn't fill in all the gaps. It doesn't fill in all the plot holes. Okay? People know this. The people can just go see the first 3 films and the prequels and know the gist of the story without watching all the Clone Wars, without reading all the books, without reading the novelization of the movie that explains some of the character motivations that aren't dealt with in the film. Okay, if you read the originals, the first book was actually, now I don't know, several chapters were cut out of the movie. It was based off one of the first drafts of the script. The other ones were just straight novelizations, and they don't really provide additional. I read them, and they don't provide additional information like is required with the Disney films. That ends up being included in a future movies. No, Star Wars is dead. It's done. The Mandalorian is the only thing that's really hanging on. The Obi-Wan series is gone. Rian Johnson's trilogy's gone. The Boneheads from Game of Thrones trilogy gone. Obviously, the Star Wars prequel, seeing an influx of retroactive appreciation, wasn't an overnight development. There's no reason to think it will. Yeah, there is lots of reason to think. However, the film themselves echoes the ebb and flow of, because the biggest problem with the prequels that people have is they're boring. There's none of space battles, which is kind of stupid. The politics of it, which is all of that is integral to the story. So maybe part of it is that the people seeing them were too young. I mean, I was 13 when I saw the originals, or 12, because it came out when I was 9, but they were made for young adults. They were not made for 4-year-olds. And given the, even the prequels, Brad, you're a moron, by the way. I don't see any comments. Is there comments? This is because, yeah, this is just, oh, there it is, 7 comments. Oh, they're on the side. No, in reality, in 20 years, yeah, you forgot how these kids watch these films who don't care, attached. Nah, maybe not. And the kids watching it though, yeah, and the toy sales are in the gutter. They're not selling the merchandising, and so the prequel trilogy came to be disliked later, more and more. But the toys sold like crazy, and the toys now aren't selling at all. And that is a very big indication of how little the Disney films are getting into the consciousness of people. Whereas the toys for the Marvel films is flying off the shelf. Even the wrestling toys they can't keep in stock. And now the dogs are destroyed. So what do you think of Brad Curran's assessment? I think he's a complete buffoon. Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for listening. This has been Channel Dad Bryon Lape. Goodbye.